Hello and welcome to day 5 of MIAMAFV, where we take a look at my favorite video game of all time, Yoshi's Island.
It's red panty night when you decide to fight me, yeah?
Have you ever? No, I've never! I'm not surprised, motherfuckers.
I'm gay.
You ask most people what their favorite game is, and you're likely to get a bit of hesitation. They're going to go through all the times they played video games and they had that wow moment. Man, I remember playing Halo CE and just being blown away by the graphics and the controls and everything. Super Mario World was amazing, this bright, colorful platformer. Spec Ops The Line hit me way harder than I thought it would. BioShock Infinite was just absolutely gorgeous. Had an amazing story, this awesome atmosphere, this awesome early turn of the 20th century vibe to it and everything. But me, I don't even hesitate. I just say Yoshi's Island like it's the most natural thing in the world. And here is my case for that. I don't think any game of the era or since has ever done such a good job of mixing platforming, puzzle solving, problem solving, and shooting all in one game. And yes, shooting. That's actually how you solve most of your problems and most of your puzzles. You have 6 eggs that you can make from eating enemies and turning them into eggs, and then you can shoot them at things, you can bounce them off of stuff, and that's how you solve most of the problems and puzzles in the game. We'll get more into that in a bit, but the first thing you're going to notice about the game is just how strikingly gorgeous it is. Everything moves at 60 frames a second back in 1995 when it was dropped. It came out pretty late in the Super Nintendo's lifespan. The N64 would come out in America in 1996, and by 1995 the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn were already out. So the mainstream focus, the wow new factor was on those consoles, and this game at the time kind of slipped under the radar. But me and my friend, my next door neighbor at the time, he had that game, and I told my parents, like, I gotta have this. Yoshi's Island is awesome. He let me borrow it. I rented it from Blockbuster back when that was a thing, and I played the hell out of it. And just FYI, my parents bought me my Super Nintendo in 1994, pretty well into its run, and I didn't get another console from my parents until 2001 when I got an N64. Yeah, 2001 is when I first got an N64. By then, the OG Xbox had launched, the PS2 was out there, the Dreamcast had been out there, the GameCube was out. I wouldn't get an Xbox OG until 2002. But that aside, Yoshi's Island was the most gorgeous looking game on the Super Nintendo by a long shot. It had an FX chip in it, had these bright, big, colorful sprites, just tons of them out on the screen at one time. It had these multiple layers of parallax scrolling, which I had never really taken into account before. I had kind of noticed it in some other games, but in some of the levels in Yoshi's Island, man, there's like 4 different layers of parallax scrolling going on. It's fucking insane. So let's get into the actual gameplay. It's predominantly a platformer, and when it comes to platforming, this game's actually pretty easy, especially in its first half, because you gotta get out of jail free card. You have the flutter. The flutter allows you to jump, second guess yourself, and kind of float up in the air just a little bit, lose a little bit of altitude, and adjust and correct yourself and come down where you want to, which is great for a guy like me who always hesitates and tries to second guess myself as I'm platforming. Other platforming games in the 16-bit era, man, they really punish you for hesitating or for second guessing yourself. It was all about the flow. It was about just going and getting it right in this kind of trial and error gameplay. That's never how I played those games. That's why I never had beaten any of them. Yoshi's Island is the first video game I actually beat, the very first one, because it doesn't punish you for second guessing yourself. It doesn't punish you for trying to correct yourself. It doesn't have any sort of this trial and error gameplay, which I always hated. I always thought that was totally unfair. I thought you should be able to go through a video game on your first run through and not die once if you were good enough. Yoshi's Island is that game. If you're good enough at platformers, you should be able to beat Yoshi's Island on your first run through and not die one single time. And the difficulty curve in Yoshi's Island is very gradual, at least until you get to World 5, the 5th of 6 worlds. Then the difficulty curve starts ramping up, but you've already been introduced and have mastered all of the aspects of the game up to this point. You know how the flutter works, you know how you can break it. If you can jump on top of an enemy and then flutter, you can just gain a whole lot of altitude. You know how to bounce eggs off of hard objects and hit things that are out of reach. You've been doing this for so long at this point, going into World 4 and World 5, that you can really tackle any problems that come up against you. And so World 5 is a challenge. World 4 was a challenge, but you get to World 5 and yeah, things are obviously ramping up a lot, but it doesn't feel like it's out of your grasp. It doesn't feel like this is impossible. You just like, I'm just almost right right there at the cusp. If I just push myself and I just keep at this, I can do it. And that's really, really, really what I loved about the game, is it wasn't so hard as to be insurmountable, but it was just enough out of your reach to keep you intrigued pretty much throughout the entire game's runtime, because there's really no other game like it. This problem-solving, puzzle-solving, shooting platformer where you have a flutter option to second-guess yourself and correct your trajectory when you're running through a level. That's really unique. I can't think of any other game that has that. Maybe some iteration of Kirby. I know I've played some where you can kind of flutter around as Kirby a little bit, but this is definitely the most prolific one. The odd thing is, people who played other platformers, a lot of my friends who had beaten Super Mario World and Aladdin and these other platforming games, they had a hard time with Yoshi's Island. They didn't know how to do it because they were used to playing that neck break speed, trial and error type of gameplay. Got to be precise, got to get it right the first time, can't second guess yourself. They weren't used to having all of the options available to you that you have in Yoshi's Island. Also in Yoshi's Island, there's no time limit. You can just piddle around in that level for as long as you want. Go ahead and figure it out. You know, we're not going to rush you here. That's another thing I liked about it. In Super Mario World, for example, there was a time limit. You know, you couldn't really take in the world and go around exploring because there was a strict time limit. If you ran out of time, then you were going to die. Also, the other thing about Yoshi's Island was there were very few hard kill barriers. There were like the spikes you could run into that would kill you instantly, but those were very rare. How you died in this game was if you got hit, Baby Mario would float away in this bubble and you would have to go hit the bubble and that would put him back on Yoshi's saddle, and then you could keep on going. And you'd have 10 seconds to do this. And then after you got him back on your saddle, the countdown clock would slowly count back up to 10. And you could also get other stars in the level, and that could push your countdown clock all the way up to 30. So you got like 30 seconds, half a minute to catch Baby Mario after you hit an enemy. Again, the difficulty curve here is very, very gradual. It's about figuring out the level and outsmarting it and beating it and figuring out all the problems. It's not really about avoiding the enemies as much as it is about that. And then the boss battles are great, man. Every single one of them are different. You kind of have to place yourself and strategize a little bit. If you don't really know what to expect, you can kind of get into push yourself into a corner where you're going to end up dead. But overall, the boss battles just take a lot of strategy. Again, it's not about quick movements. It's not about reaction times. It's not about being good at platforming. It's about figuring out what you got to do to defeat the boss and placing yourself at the right place at the right time. For example, the Raphael the Raven boss fight. That one is a perfect example of just kind of avoiding Raphael the Raven as he runs around the little globe and figuring out this gameplay mechanic that has never been in the game before, where you're basically running around this tiny little planet like King Kai's planet or something from Dragon Ball Z, and just trying to place yourself so you can finally beat Raphael the Raven. Same thing with the final boss fight with Baby Bowser. I mean, you got to do the ground and pound thing at the right time and time it right so you can hit Baby Bowser. And then you go into the second leg of it where you have this basically straight on shooter, again a gameplay mechanic you've never had before, and you got to figure it out and shoot out into Big Bowser as he's coming towards you while this heavy metal track plays in the background. It's scary, it's crazy, it's unlike anything in the game up to that point, and every boss fight feels like, holy shit, I didn't know this was happening. I'd never played with this gameplay mechanic, but it's not that hard. I can do it, I just have to apply myself. And it is that mechanic of being just enough out of reach to intrigue you that really sets this game apart, and in my opinion makes it the greatest video game ever.